The Tosa-class battleships were part of the revived 8-8 program of the Imperial Japanese Navy. See last week's video on the Amagi class for more details on that. The design began life with the development of the Nagato class, which came about just as the Battle of Jutland was being fought. Although Nagato herself wouldn't be laid down until about a year after, the design was too far along for any changes to be made once the various lessons of Jutland had actually been understood and processed. Instead, Captain Yuzuru Hiraga, who amongst other things had been put in charge of the design of the ships for the 8-8 fleet, proposed a series of design changes to the second Nagato-class ship, the Mutsu, which was further away from being laid down and thus could have significant changes made to it, since it hadn't been approved for funding in the same year as Nagato. This design, A125, would have resulted in quite the different ship. It added an extra twin turret, reduced the number of boilers whilst maintaining speed by using more modern designs, and also changed the number and layout of the secondary battery, along with changes to the armour and torpedo defence systems. However, due to the increased cost of the revised design and the delays that the changes would inevitably cause, this option was rejected and Mutsu would be completed as simply the second Nagato-class ship. With that said, the budget that approved Mutsu had also explicitly approved 2 modified ships the following year. Not wanting to let all that hard work go to waste, Hiraga simply took all the best bits and formulated design A127 for these 2 ships. This new design was much larger, displacing just under 40,000 tons at normal load and just over 44,000 tons at full load. This would then be accepted as the Tosa class. A total of 91,000 shaft horsepower would be required to get these enlarged battleships through the water at 26.5 knots. This was an explicit requirement to allow the new ships to operate alongside the Nagato class as a single tactical unit, with the fuel being mostly oil, but with a few boilers using a mixed oil and coal fueling system. Compared to the Nagatos, the ships used the same 16.1-inch guns, but had an additional twin turret for a total of 5, 2 superfiring forward and a cluster of 3 aft, with the central turret superfiring over the rear turret and the foremost turret in line with the others, somewhat like the eventual layout of the Nelson class, except pointing backwards. The secondary battery was again to use the same 5.5-inch or 140mm guns as Nagato, with 20 casement mounts in total, 12 in the hull, slightly higher than on the Nagatos, and the remaining 8 in the superstructure, all in an effort to get the secondary battery more workable in non-calm sea conditions. 4 3-inch anti-aircraft guns were also allowed for, along with an allowance in the displacement to replace them with heavier 4.7-inch weapons. Finally, 8 heavy 24-inch torpedo tubes were installed, 4 in above-water launchers and 4 in below-the-waterline tubes. However, the design did face a problem. Even with modern engines, to keep the speed up to the needed rate along with the heavy main battery meant there wasn't much weight left for armour, and this was on a ship that would presumably be meeting other 16-inch armed vessels in battle. The solution attempted was to angle the otherwise relatively thin 11-inch belt to a maximum of 15 degrees to increase the apparent angle of impact and thus improve protection. Somewhat more concerning given the lessons of Jutland was the turret and barbette armour, which was not much thicker even at its maximum. The deck armour was somewhat better, with a 4-inch thickness above the vital areas, although even here this consisted of 2 separate layers, one atop the other, and layered armour is always significantly less effective than a single plate of equal thickness when it comes to battleship protection. A layered torpedo defence system was also incorporated, and overall the ships therefore would be fairly swift and very well armed, with 5 turrets making it fairly difficult to disarm the vessels in a prolonged fight. However, for battleships expecting to meet other vessels such as the South Dakotas or the N3s in open combat, Their armour scheme does leave a lot to be desired, although Hiraga was probably making the best that he could with the restrictions that had been placed on him. Both ships, Tosa and Kaga, began construction in 1920 and were actually launched in 1921, being the most advanced of the three nations' next-generation designs, with the successors supposed to be the Key class, which merged the concepts of the Tosas and Amagis into an early version of the fast battleship concept. However, as with most other ships mentioned, the Washington Naval Treaty forced the cancellation of the ships in 1922. The hull of Tosa was towed out to sea and used in a live fire drill, which would go on to have significant long-term implications on Japanese shell design. Amidst the hail of shells, bombs, mines and torpedoes thrown at the ship, 2 of the shells would hit the water short of the ship, but survive to penetrate under the belt and go deep into the heart of the vessel. This would inspire the Japanese to adapt their shell designs to try and take advantage of this effect against enemy vessels successfully, as opposed to in dud form. Bismarck, interestingly, managed a similar hit against Prince of Wales, but its shell was a dud, with its fuse set so that if it had actually been working, it would have detonated long before reaching the ship. Conversely, amongst the various changes the Japanese made were longer fuses on their shells, which would actually come back to benefit their targets at the Battle of Samar, when a number of shells passed clean through lightly built American destroyers without exploding. The hull of the Tosa was then scuttled offshore. Kaga was due to be scrapped, but the Great Kanto earthquake mentioned in the Amagi video meant that she was drafted in at the last minute to take the place of the ruined hull of Amagi. She would follow a similar development cycle to Akagi, complete with the 3-stack flying off decks at first, although her smaller size and lesser power plant compared to the former battlecruiser meant that she was always slower and initially would carry a much smaller air group. However, this led to her being given priority for modernisation, and although she would remain slower, she would emerge able to operate slightly more aircraft than the notionally larger Akagi. Like Akagi, she would be present for Pearl Harbor, then help the initial Japanese offensive, although missing the Indian Ocean operations due to damage from going aground, and would also be present for the Battle of Midway. Along with Akagi, she would be caught unawares by several formations of Dauntless dive bombers, and would receive at least 4 bomb hits, which set off the armed and fueled aircraft in her hangar in a series of spectacular explosions, resulting in her eventual evacuation and scuttling by torpedo.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.